At 1909, Carnell reads a statement about more not being done by white and black people. But, what exactly did King want more black people to do? Did the civil rights movement lay out clear marching orders? Certainly personal responsibility is in there somewhere. At 2254, Carnell harped on King's statement about a separate black road to power and fulfillment being unrealistic. How do you think King would feel today about any oppressed group of people having a separate road to a lasting power and fulfillment? What would be his position on the Palestinian issue? The Black Power advocates were possibly thinking of the Jewish American model of culture-based nationalism. Another example would be the Amish people. How is a Jews thinking African Americans should act collectively for the power and fulfillment of reparations, any different than the concept of the Black Power movement of then or Black nationalism of today? Black Power was not a strictly political movement, but a movement to create a black social solidarity. It was also an attempt to instill a sense of collective purpose and destiny on the community level, as the Black Panther Party epitomized. The Dr. King Carnell is reading had not come to that level of consciousness yet, but he soon began to drift that way. Just because you partition the government does not mean what you get from them will have any real value, if their heart is not in it, and behind it. At 2325, Carnell talks about the Black Power movement breaking themselves off. No people can break themselves off, especially today in this global economy. Talking about breaking oneself off, a Jews has broken itself away from the rest of the African American populace with its arbitrary adoption of the nonsensical designation a Jews and by starting a confrontational and antagonistic reparations dialogue. At about 2348, Carnell quotes King, saying there is no salvation through isolation. This implies that Americans were the only people blacks could associate and do business with. A Jews is constantly painting a picture of the isolation of African Americans in the U.S., but want to, in hindsight, be critical of black leaders back then, who at least understood that they were, in essence, isolated by the government and society. If the people did not follow them, is it all the leaders' fault, or are the people themselves to blame also? If King thought black separatism was a pipe dream, what brought him later to the disillusionment to say that he feared he was integrating his people into a burning house? At 28:04, Carnell quotes King talking about snobbishness. To be snobbish and engage in trivial activities is to be American, which is likely what will be produced if reparations does what many hope. Pop culture and consumerism is the one area where America has cultural uniformity, many black nationalist and Afrocentric-minded people included, but will probably never admit to it. At 28:30, King called on the middle class to do more, but he also calls on the unemployed, and I assumed the impoverished, to do more, based on what Carnell has read. He basically was asking, even the lowest among us, to do as much for themselves as they could. That he called for organization means he understood discipline is important, not just in struggle but in basic living. So why this blanket attack on the concept of do for self without any qualification? At 30:25, King expresses the belief that government programs were the answer, or at least part of the answer, to the problems of crime, illegitimacy, etc. Carnell and more are asking the government to have similar responses and resources directed to solve these problems today, as part of the reparations package. Empty line. We saw what the governmental response was after his assassination and the subsequent riots, and we see those problems are worse today. In fact, Jesse Jackson later saw fit to say, "What does it matter that the doors of opportunity are open to you, if you are too drunk to stagger through them?" Personal responsibility and discipline have to be a big part of progress and significant change. This unresolved problem also speaks to culture, as an unappreciated factor, of which this movement has yet to address, to any significant degree, if any, and certainly not in any meaningful way. How is reading King's words concerning the efficacy of violence relevant? 30:58. Offensive or proactive violence practically never happened, and what little talk of it that existed was mostly rhetorical. I'm sure there are those who would say COINTELPRO had been the instigators of much of it. We see enough of strange behavior and statements still today, from people and organizations involved in our struggle, or speaking on our behalf. At around 37:50 Carnell talks about the intellectual work, study, that King put in and says everyone should do this. Sounds like she is basically saying think for yourself. If Carnell can advocate thinking for yourself, why can't she advocate for doing for yourself? Carnell created a false equivalency in talking about the bicultural nature of African Americans. It seems the majority of us still don't value our history beyond the experience of slavery. There is much to be learned from knowing something about your past. That we were Africans was why we ended up here, and why we are not full Americans. If we are not Africans and we are not full Americans, who/want are we? More than anything, we are arguably more influenced by modernity. People today identify themselves more with a subculture they do any general cultural affiliation. I can certainly envision the possibility of King today wearing African garb and celebrating Kwanzaa. The problem is much more on the side of denial of anything African by African Americans, than the other way around, simply because people don't value history, and they live in the now. This group embodies this denial, in not including African in its name. You also corrupt the definition of descendant. Descent is based on bloodline/family surname. You say you are the descendants of slaves, but you don't have just one ancestor. As Carnell always infers, descent is synonymous with lineage, and theoretically is a line extending backwards infinitely. Most of your forebears were not slaves. Why can't you all admit that? Using the logic that allows you to come up with the designation adus, makes white Americans also the descendants of slaves. You still have not distinguished yourselves. Lastly, King said we have to do more than just vote, 56:48, but what came out of your recent summit besides voting down ballot?